I think we're going to be joined on stage by the filmmaker of tonight's documentary, Mr. Jim Hanon. Jim Hanon. Absolutely. Well, that's a hard act to follow. That is the definition of hard act to follow. 2 years I tried to play Strangers in the Night on saxophone. It was a waste. I angered every dog in the neighborhood.
It was the wrong song.
So I found myself in a difficult position because in doing a little research, I came across this quote by jazz legend Louis Armstrong, who said, "Man, if you got to ask, you'll never know." So how do I ask you questions in the light of that? But it's about jazz, so we'll just improvise this a little bit, okay? Okay, and think of your questions because you're going to have an opportunity to ask them as well in a few minutes. So, you know, I just have to say before that, just listening to you backstage, it reminded me of a line from a film, I don't know if you remember Chariots of Fire. And one of the characters, Eric Lytle, was Olympic sprinter, but he was also a missionary. And he has this one great line where he said, I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. And listening to you play right there, I think we all felt his pleasure. So that's it's a real gift that we have. I'd say welcome to the Sheen Center, but it's really welcome back because you've both been here before. Jim, you were here last year with another film, and Kirk, you were here about 2 years ago with your #LoveCovers concert and tour. So welcome back. And this is not your first collaboration. You've worked before together, but last year, Jim, when you were here, you were ecstatic talking about this film. You were so excited about it. And Kirk, in an email that you sent when we were communicating about this event, you called it one of the most important projects you've ever been involved with. So, I ask you both, Kirk, why is this story so important to you? And Jim, why did you want to be the filmmaker to tell it?
Sure. Well, first of all, good evening. And you know, this film is absolutely. I don't. It's not one of the most. You know, so far, unless you know, next thing I'll do is something really important. It is the most important thing I've ever done, and that, by the way, it stands in the queue behind some pretty incredible things, like, you know, standing on stage in Johannesburg in 1994, right, the year that apartheid fell apart, and there was Nelson Mandela, you know, side, and I'm standing there, you know, behind Whitney Houston, and there's 75,000 people, mixed race audience, legally, you know, for the first time. And watching simultaneously on HBO back in the States and all over Europe and everywhere, there were over 7 million people watching. And it was such a huge moment for me, you know, and then in that moment, you know, Whitney's singing Amazing Grace. Of course, we had done that song plenty of times, but the serendipity was she stepped aside and she looked back at me, and she used to call me Bishop. And so I guess I'm in the right place right now. But she said, "Bishop, you play." So there I am, standing there. The boss has passed the ball to me. So now I'm going to play in front of, you know, 7 or 8 million people, the song that I first played on the saxophone when I was 12, the very first song. Wow. Right. And not only that, the first song I performed live was at church. My dad was a pastor. And it was Amazing Grace. And so it was just, I almost couldn't get the mouthpiece in my mouth. It was like, it was just the gravity of that moment, you know. But when I look at Humanité, you know, listen, I mean, I had several moments back there. We were sitting back there watching the film, Jim and I'm like, handkerchief out, you know, I'm like, all blubbering. But for me, you know, that, like, I learned to speak French, right? When I was in the 9th grade, for some reason, I wanted to speak French. And so I started learning. Nobody was like going, "Hey, yeah, that's a good idea." I was just doing it. And, you know, God puts these little things in you. And fast forward, I'm in Paris studying as a 19-year-old, you know, at the l'Alliance Française. There's a French alliance not far from here in Manhattan. And there I am learning French, right? And now I'm thinking, man, I'm writing to my girlfriend, "Hey, baby, we're going to get married, but when we do, the first thing we're going to do is move to Paris." You know, well, actually, the first thing we did a couple of years in was have kids. And, you know, and then there were lots of things in the queue, and had no idea how much it would cost to do it. So we kept putting it off, and eventually, 4 kids, we moved to Paris. And so now I'm really speaking French, and then I began to learn Spanish, and so I went to Guatemala and studied. So I'm saying all that to say that the way that I was wired was leading to this moment. So that's what it means to me.
Wow. Well, for all of you that know Kirk Whalum really well, then you already know my answer, right? I had to do this. But interesting enough, you know, like, and it also, if you know Kirk, you know, he'll start something without really fully knowing what's going to happen. So I think he called me and just said, Jim, you know, I'm going overseas. I think, you know, I'd like to do some behind the scenes stuff. I don't know if you got time. I don't want you to pray about it. And, you know, maybe join me. I don't know, there might be something here. And we had collaborated, and I knew his heart, and I knew something was there. But like him, I didn't know the full extent of it either. When we started the project, it was just maybe do some behind the scenes for his album, Humanité. And we didn't have any money. We still don't have any money. No. But like a lot of things, very meaningful, you know, you step out and the provision comes and you find God along the way. And that's also been, you know, one of the things that attracted me to the project was to see that unfold. And it has, and it continues to unfold.
Well, you know, a lot of the films that you've done really deal with these important issues. So, you know, let's talk a little bit just for a moment about the power of film as an art form. And, you know, Kirk shared the story in the film about how his dad found his calling in part thanks to screening, you know, the 10 Commandments. So as a filmmaker, when you set out to do a project, do you set out with the intention of trying to say something that will hopefully change hearts and minds?
When I first started my career, I did think, you know, well, this is a great story, and if people knew this story, it might move them on off the dime on this or that, or this segment is underrepresented. There's a really powerful story to do that, and that's what I did. But I didn't come into a real fullness until I kind of set that aside and then just listened and just said, I'm going to serve a story. And I think if you hear a story that's really powerful and you can feel it, I mean, the first experience for Humanité was us. I mean, this was an unfolding thing. You heard how we started. And so being obedient, just listening, I think that's where I draw a lot of life. And that opportunity to collaborate with an international jazz great, I mean, that's where he lives. And so we knew a few things. We knew that there was a powerful visual story here. We knew that there were underrepresented people, and we knew that the texture of that humanity was beautiful, that there was a beloved community that could be represented. And with humility, we just started to do it and let it unfold. I guess, I don't know if I answered your question, but I think listening to your heart, listening to what's kind of behind everything, and when that's God, is a much more powerful place to be, and that's where I come from now as a filmmaker.
Yeah, it's like that paradox about, you know, you finding what you needed to hear, you heard in silence. And you know, there's a wonderful saying from Saint Benedict said, you need to listen with the ear of your heart, and
right.
That's what you
right.
Hear.
But also, I think, well, you know, there are a lot of activists probably in this room, and so you know what it's like to try to engage people, and a lot of times people feel like they're trying to be engaged, and that can ruin the life of what really needs to be shared. But when you're human and you can share through story, it can transcend even the politics. I mean, it's a tough time. I mean, I'm traveling and really enjoying this thing overseas, but I'm an older white guy, and the current president makes it hard for me to get into some of these places over there. And I've traveled a lot, and the barriers have never been that strong before. So there was something in my heart that sort of weaved that this type of film, this type of message is rare. It's not that common. And I didn't want to force anything on the audience. I didn't want to tell the audience anything. I wanted them to experience this man's heart, this man's story, and the people that we would encounter, because I believe that their voice, much stronger than mine, would do the job.
So So now let's bring it to music for a second. And, Jim talked about finding that common humanity. Again, watching this, just like the power of film, the power of music, watching this reminded me, I have no idea why, it's a very silly anecdote from my life, but I remember the first time I understood the power of music to unite people, bring people together, and I'm going to date myself here, was as a little kid, I remember my parents taking me to see, do you remember Close Encounters? And the last scene, when the spaceship lands, the way that the representatives of Earth choose to speak with the extraterrestrials is through music. That music was that way to make that connection. And I think that's really kind of the central thesis here, but it's, I think Longfellow said that music is the universal language of mankind. But I think you're trying to reach something in this film that kind of transcends ethnic differences, even the racial divide, that really cuts down to that, whatever that is, at the mystery of the human person. Can you talk and maybe unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so Close Encounters was a very important movie for me too, man. So I think I'm older than you. But, so human languages, right? There's so many of them. And then there's dialects, and there's patois, and there's mixtures of languages. You go to Aruba, and you're speaking Papiamento, right? And it's Dutch, and it's Spanish, and all, right? So human languages, right? They all have grammar and syntax and all of that. But the language of God, I truly believe, is the sound, right? I truly believe that the truer witness of the divine is sound, this music. And it's so profound. I mean, here we are trying to talk about it and discuss it, but, describe it, it's futile because it's so profound. Just to say that music, I can play something and you have absolutely, if you can hear it, again, there are people who are hearing challenged, right? But if you can hear, or even I have a deaf cousin who can feel when I'm playing. Like she'll come to our concerts. She has 2 daughters who are also deaf. But they'll come and they can feel the music, right? But music has a way of, I can break and enter into your heart with this thing. You have absolutely no security when it comes to that. It's just a fact. That's anybody who plays an instrument. Sometimes they don't realize how powerful you are to navigate, to shift culture, this huge behemoth, cruise ship of a thing called culture. Music can change the direction of it. It can change our thoughts. It can change the atmosphere, and that without people even knowing that it's happening. Like we're sitting here talking, right? And you can either agree with me or disagree, right? You can say, well, he's close, or you can say, man, I don't even speak English that well, so whatever. So I'm just talking, right? But you can be from Denmark, you can be from Vietnam, doesn't matter. And I do this. far as I'm concerned, man, the truer witness of who God is, it comes through music.
It sure does. I mean, beauty needs no explanation. I guess that's why, you know, Dante in his work about paradise, the higher they got up the mountain of paradise, the more it went into the celestial music. Because I guess music is not only the universal language of earth, maybe it's the language of heaven too.
That's my point. And by the way, I do believe, you know, again, I don't know about extraterrestrials, all of that. I'm good with it. I mean, if they show up, I'm like, cool, how good. You know, God is even bigger than I thought, you know. But man, so here, check this out. That changed my life because I had a feeling that something was going to change right through there, and it did. And that was that these things that we are attached to, I literally couldn't even come out on stage without this with me. They all operate by virtue of those tones. Because remember, when that movie came out, we were still, you know, like dialing up. And the tones were just about to start. And so to me, that is a big example that you hit it on the head, man. It's powerful.
Yeah. We owe John Williams some residual money for playing that.
I think he'd be okay.
I think so too. Now, one interesting thing you said in the film was that music comes out of the crucible of oppression, and that when forces are working against you, it comes out better. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as say that all music does, but my experience is that the best music does. You know, even by the way, you know, Tchaikovsky. You know, Tchaikovsky went through a lot of changes. You know, and so if you study his life and you know that those beautiful melodies didn't just happen because he studied at the Sorbonne or whatever, he studied, you know, with the great Russian composers, that those melodies came out of his pain. You know, and so to me, man, the very best music, and I hate that, I would like for not to have to go through stuff, but I really do think that there's some correlation.
Yeah, well, Beethoven wrote his Moonlight Sonata while he was going deaf, and that must have been very difficult for him. Jim, there seems to be a lot of similarities between jazz and filmmaking. First of all, in the film, they say that all jazz begins with empathy, and the late film critic Roger Ebert called movies the great machines of empathy. But also jazz is very collaborative. You each have to, you bring your individual musical voice to the composition, but somehow you have to collaborate to create a cohesive whole. So in this film, you bring a lot of different voices. There's a lot of different people that we meet on this journey. Can you talk a little bit about how you decided those people, those stories, and maybe the challenges of sort of weaving those all together into this beautiful composition that you had?
Well, that's really good question. There were a lot of people in here. And it goes kind of to the heart of why I even like working with Kirk so much. I believe in visual jazz, and I hope you got that from the film. I hope you got a sense of how the music and the visuals would work together, and how there was improvisational moments that had happened that we just took advantage of. And for me, it was just a delight, because it had to be made jazz, because we didn't have a crew. It was just traveling with, cameras, and as things happened, see them and respond to them. And as Kirk is just recording by a window, having some intuition enough to grab that, not knowing fully how that was going to even fill into the texture of the piece. But it was a great collaboration. I knew also that there was something really deep inside of Kirk. I don't know, you guys know him, but I hadn't heard him talk about Dr. King to the depth that he did in that interview. He had gone to a place, and that was the product of a lot of conversations that we had together. And I knew the film had to be anchored in something more than just this great music that was happening everywhere. There had to be this meaning behind it, this place where it came from, and what that meant, and how that would echo through the voices. Because I knew that somehow all these young musicians in all these other parts of the country love this man, and they resonate with him. And why? It's because he has soul. It's because he feels and empathizes, and they can sense that. And they find hope in that, because if he can find his voice, then they can find theirs. And I knew that the journey that we would be on was to see these musicians find their voices together. What a privilege. And you may think it's a small thing to do the entire thing without a narrator, but there's no narrator. There's no person telling you, oh, and this happens, and this is the next place you're at. It all unfolds through a narrative heart that began with Kirk, that I knew echoed in all of the other musicians that were collaborating with him. So the art was to just pursue that, to listen to that, to find it, and then reflect it back.
You know, being where we are, being a faith-based arts center, I have to ask this question. So much of the film speaks to that intersection between music and faith. You know, you recount how your earliest, most formative memories were in church, how you wanted your saxophone to sound like a gospel singer. You know, you yourself are an ordained minister, and even the parts that deal with the civil rights movement really reaffirm that idea that the civil rights was inspired and sustained by the African American church communities. I mean, the doctor in Dr. Martin Luther King, he was a doctor of divinity. So even the young South African singer in the film always talks about singing and praying, and it reminds me of that famous quote by St. Augustine that, you know, when you sing, you pray twice. Can you talk a little bit about that intersection of faith and music in your own personal journey? Absolutely.
I will start by saying, though, that I did have a little bit of an ulterior motive as far as, you know, I was concerned. You know, I get together with a great storyteller, an artist in his own right. You know, I knew that he would hear all of this stuff differently from me, that he would be able to take it and sort of place it in its own space, you know, this beautiful space of its own that Jim sort of nurtured. But, you know, let me say that one of my primary objectives that I never spoke to him was that I knew at least one of the artists was Muslim. And I was intent on just living out what we as musicians live out every single day. Right? We hang out, we make music, we empathize with each other, we respect each other's art, we respect each other's faith traditions and other cultural, you know, particulars. It's what we do. And we take it for granted sometimes as musicians, you know. And I thought, man, I wish everybody could get a taste of this, because all of a sudden somebody came along and whispered, hey, you're not supposed to like them, right? Because they're Muslims, you know, or you're not supposed to like them, you know, they're Jewish or they're Buddhist or whatever. And I've never felt comfortable with that. And I've been in situations where it was exclusively Christian, as it were, and there were some very ugly things said, and everybody said, you know, but something inside of me was saying, no, that's just not it. And so for me, I want to mention that, man, I'm grateful that Jim subliminally caught that, and he emphasized, you know, for instance, Afghan, this artist is Muslim, and by the way, he has never performed really in the States. He's not known here, but he has something like 6 million followers on social media in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia alone. You know, so he's very famous, right? And I don't even know if many people know he's Muslim, you know. But to me, it was important for us to hear his voice and hear how he loves God and how he respects other people's lives and he wants to be a blessing and all of that. Man, that was just huge to me.
Oh, but sure. It was such a delight to let it just unfold. I mean, I knew where Kirk's coming from. We know where he's coming from with his faith. But it's something that is living. It's something that is exchanged. So it's not something we had to force. It's not something we even had to talk about. And in the early days of creating the film, there were some voices, you know, from a marketing standpoint. Oh, are you going to go for a Christian audience? You're going to go for, like, how are you going to do this? And we said, no, let's just go for a human audience. And let's just let it play out, because I think that is a beauty. That's a beautiful thing. And I didn't have to worry too much about it, because this man can't talk a couple sentences without talking about God. It's just going to come out.
Well, I mean, Louis Armstrong's got a great quote. I think he said, "You blow who you are," and I mean that's basically you play who you are. So that's.
Did you guys love that Corogocho scene? You know, the whole sequence where they're teaching, you know, the kids how to play and how to make that work. Well, the writer of that song, Kwetu, Aaron Rumba, is here. Aaron, could you say hi?
Aaron Rumba. And Aaron is he's a Kenyan expatriate. He lives in New York now. But when we first met, he was still living in Nairobi. And so, you know, when he found out we were coming, he was like, "Oh, well, I'll be there." I'm like, "Well, yeah, well, you're going to see yourself, pal, on that screen." But what an amazing musician. And when Elizabeth with Ghetto Classics said, you know, "Can you write something, you know, for us to play?" I'm like, "Yeah, but man, I bet there's something that's Kenyan that you guys should play that I can maybe play along." And so I started listening to Aaron's music more intently, and that song Kwetu, I'm like, I don't think we're going to find anything more perfect than this, so let's just play it.
That's beautiful. A beautiful piece, and thank you for being with us tonight. That actually segues perfectly to the next question, because that whole end sequence, I think, speaks so beautifully and eloquently to, I think, who you are. You know, you get the sense that it's not just, you know, the people often talk about the privilege of artists, and they don't speak as much of the responsibility of artists. You know, the idea that artists should be agents of a positive change. You know, found this quote, and it's hard to believe it was written 2,500 years ago. Greek philosopher Damon of Athens said, let me write the music of a nation, and I don't care who writes the laws." Meaning that music, song, art is really what gets a society aimed where it's going. Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe the responsibility you feel as a you know, a world-class musician, and the responsibility that brings with it?
Sure. I need to get that clipboard when you're done, because these quotes are killing me, man. Man, that last one I most definitely want. And I was just in Macedonia a few months ago, which is now changed names, you know, and the whole Greek issues and all that. But again, all these geopolitical, you know, like darts and pieces going on. But at the end of the day, it is absolutely music that still settles things down. In fact, speaking of Macedonia, we're there. I was playing with Foreplay, and you know, and God rest the soul of Chuck Loeb, who I was replacing for that year. But his folks, his family lived not too far from here. But the president of Macedonia was our host in this particular moment. And he's a big, you know, jazz fan, and so he invited us to the, you know, presidential, you know, sort of summer home. And so we're sitting there in the beautiful garden, it's a lovely day in Macedonia, and he says to me, he says, "You know that in Macedonia we tend to play music in 7/8 time." I'm like, the president just said something to me about time signature in music. I mean, this is like deep music theory, right? I said, okay. He said, you know why we do that? I said, no. He said, well, actually, normally when you're playing in 7, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3. He said, normally you either play it 4 plus 3 or 3 plus 4, right? It feels like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Or it feels 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So he says, well, we play at 3 plus 4, and the reason is that there's a cricket indigenous to this area. And that cricket is ubiquitous. He's everywhere over here. And if you'll just be quiet long enough, you're going to hear one of them. And check out what time signature he's chirping. We were afraid to be quiet. And so we sat still, and sure enough, We were like, oh my God. And again, and he went on from there. He's like, oh yeah, and of course you know that music is tuned to A440, and in most countries in Europe sometimes it's 442, but actually music long ago it was tuned lower. It was tuned to A336 or something. He said that's because you know the music and nature and creation all resonates better at this lower pitch. And we were like, will you come to America? No, I mean it's just incredible.
Wow. Well, I don't know if we have crickets here, but I don't know what the musical signature of roaches are. I don't know where they
Right. Or the subway rat, you know.
You know, there's a beautiful moment in the film where you're talking about your dad, where he would go early to church to help prepare the meals. And you said that you really learned a lesson of that about sort of being in solidarity and proximity. So I know that's important to you, and I know reading about your filmmaking style, you sort of define yourself sometimes as community filmmaking. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, you know, as a Catholic, it reminds me of Pope Francis recently said that shepherds have to have the smell of the sheep on them. It's that idea of being there with the people and solidarity with the people. How does that idea really influence you both as artists?
In our culture, unfortunately, I mean, we're a celebrity culture. And I think it pays everybody pays a price for that. The celebrities pay a price for that because they can't get out and actually see people and have interaction and experience community because they're swamped by paparazzi or whatever, and they're all important. But it also elevates them and what they say, I guess, to have an influence on the culture. And that's a dissonance too, because they're kind of up here and they're not of the people. And then you got an industry that caters to that. And so you can't actually sell a film anymore without having a celebrity in it, right? And who's your voiceover? And the voiceover might be wonderful, Pakistani girl, but, maybe you should get, Denzel Washington or something. And he's great too, but it's not driven by what comes out of the story, by listening and by hearing. It's driven by what sells. And unfortunately, we get caught up in that. And so I guess I got caught up in that. And I didn't like who I was. I didn't like how I thought. I didn't like the separation that it created in me. I didn't like that I was apart. I didn't like that I felt like I couldn't do. And I made mistakes there. And I found life again when I kind of set that aside and said, well, no, wait a minute. There's bakers, and there's mechanics, and there's doctors, and there's filmmakers. And what if we were all the same? And what if we were all in a community? And what if we all listened and loved and shared and drew out stories? And then I found the most amazing stories. The most amazing stories from all over the world, from places that, man, they got as much talent as Hollywood have. They just don't have the engine. They just don't have the mechanism around them. But do they have the life? Do they have the story? Can they change your heart if you listen to them? Oh, yeah. On even a more deeper and profound level. So I guess that's where I want to go. I think that's what I saw in Kirk's heart. That's what I saw in the project. And I want to help others go there too. And I want to free that up, because if a filmmaker is like a baker, you get your bread here and you get your film here, and it's in your community, and it's good, and it nurtures, and there's something about it that reflects life. I think that would free the celebrity. I think that would free the artist. As an artist, that's where I want to be.
Man, very profound, brother. And yeah, seriously. My dad, he was kind of a big shot in the microcosm. He pastored kind of the big, hip and groovy church. It was one of the first sort of mega churches. And for us, we had something like 600 members. That was huge in Memphis. But he was also sort of pioneering employee, ultimately executive in the postal system, right? So he was the guy that once he got in there, the white folks who ran the postal system and regionally knew that because it was a government agency, thank God for the government, they had to diversify, right? But they didn't want to just hire anybody. They wanted to have somebody like my dad who was in the black community, so he could say, okay, hire this one. And they knew that if my dad said hire him, they didn't have to worry about who this person was. And that happened over and over and over and over again. So people come up to me now, my dad's in heaven, but people come up to me and say, I retired 10 years ago from a career that I had because of your dad, right? And I want to thank you. And yet, my dad was that person that he was always down. Like they talk about, just being down. Man, I mean, he would rather hang around with people who were genuine and true. And especially if they didn't have anything, right? Because he knew that that's where the gold was. That's where the true riches were. And like, I'll give you an example. The man who sang in the men's chorus, the male chorus at church, as we used to call it, the male coast. The male coast at church. And this man was a sanitation worker, man. And he was one of the folks that my dad he was always, they were in the same space. In other words, that guy didn't feel any less than my dad, because my dad always made him feel important. And, later on, I got a chance to meet all the surviving members of that group of sanitation workers who had the courage to say, that's it. In Memphis, they said, I am a man. And they stood up, and Mark, they said, will you come? He said, I'll come and I'll stand with you. And so, to me, man, that's always been the case. I find myself now, again, it's just my dad's, and my mom too, right? Both of them, their DNA in me. Had a class in seminary where we had to go and at this place called Manor House, it's a place of radical hospitality for the poor. Many, many homeless people depend on this place to get a shower. They come in and at least get clean socks, brand new socks. They can come and get, all their toiletries and stuff, and they can hang out in a place, where they don't have to worry about because being a homeless is, man, you talk about being afraid constantly, right? Because, you say, well, that person's crazy. No. That doesn't mean the person is not afraid, because it's very dangerous out there. So I find myself there now every Thursday. If I'm in town, I'm the barber, man. I'm there cutting hair. I just try to figure what can I do, and I knew how to cut hair. So I wasn't that good, but at least if I keep doing it, I'll get better. So now, 10 years later, I'm actually pretty good, but I'm a much better person now than I am a barber because of the people whose hair I cut, right? I'm in physical proximity with the people who are living the life that speaks profoundly about the truth that I need to know.
Well, I only got one more question, so after this, we invite you to line up on that side of the stage and you can ask some questions. Got one more quote, if you want the clipboard. It's actually from your fellow jazz legend, Wynton Marsalis. He said, through improvisation, jazz teaches you about yourself. So what I ask both of you, you can answer either way. Either what has this journey with jazz taught you about yourselves, or what do you hope a viewer might learn from watching this journey to hopefully build, you said we can't solve the problems of the world, but we can do something. What do you hope they might learn to be able to do to help build this beloved community?
Yeah, I carry around a camera. I have it here, and I walk up here, and it's a lens, and it's how I can see. And so when I go to these places and I see these people, I have the privilege of showing you what I see. That is, it's a beautiful reminder to me, and I hope it's a beautiful reminder to the audience of the other, the beauty of the other, the value of the other.
Yeah. I was sitting in church today at Christian Cultural Center in Brooklyn, and where you at, CCC? Well, Pastor A.R. Bernard, he wrote a word on the board, right? Providence. I could have gotten up right then and left because I'm like, that's what I came here to, that was it. That's the word. But then, of course, he went on to wax eloquent, about that. And man, that's what this has taught me more than anything, is that you got to just jump and the net will appear. Because if you keep waiting around, by the way that I kind of got into doing this project, this record, is that I kind of looked at, when I had my 59th birthday, I kind of had a come to Jesus moment. It's like, okay, 59, that's the last of those. And the last 20 years, like 39, it was like yesterday, and so that zoomed by really quickly. So what's going to happen now is let's say God lets me live, this next 20 years and keep doing what I'm doing, right? It's going to zoom by. And so I just said to the guy in the mirror, I said, bro, now's your time. And so I just started, man, I made some major changes in my life. And I should say my wife and I made some major changes. I called my girlfriend, I looked at her, my soulmate, man, and I said, baby, I'm about to jump out the boat. And so this film is me jumping out the boat. Thank you, brother, for being there to catch me.
We're glad you did. We're glad you both did. So now we're going to take some questions from the audience. I think we have someone over there. If you could just, and please just ask that you do phrase it in the form of a question.
Hi, Diane.
Hi, Kirk. I'm going to have to talk, if I can, low voice. Kirk and I go way back from 1980 in Houston. I told him he was going to be the most famous person on the planet, and here you are. He didn't believe me.
So
You always had a spiritual presence, and I wanted to say this. I have to say this because people don't understand the person you are. I remember there was an outdoor concert in Houston. Everyone was late. It was hot as heck. And you were scared this was your first outdoor concert. And you start playing, and there was a wind, a cool breeze going across the park, and everybody was calm. And you played beautifully. And that's the spiritual person you are. So I'm not surprised to see this documentary. I was thinking about you just this past week because I was looking for a documentary from you by this time because I am in TV now. I wanted to know, because I know you traveled a lot, how did you pick those special persons in your film to be in this documentary?
excellent question. And Diane, thank you for those sweet things that you say, wow, that's a distant memory for me, but it's so beautiful that you still remember it. Yeah, I got to tell you that there was nothing contrived about that process, like who are we going to, the whole idea is these collaborations with these artists from these far-flung places to prove this point, right? That we're all very different. We're all just the same, And so for me, I just kind of sat back when I had that 59 moment, Diane, I just said, I've been traveling around the world for these years. Now I need to put that together in some kind of way that maybe lets people in on where I've been, what I've been experiencing, and these amazing people that I keep bumping into. I'll give you an example. One of the artists you didn't see, again, the album is 16 different collaborations, right? And one of the artists is from New Zealand, and she's originally from South Africa, but she grew up in New Zealand. Her name is Andrea Lisa. I'm performing on a cruise ship on the Capital Jazz Cruise, and Andrea and her band are the house band on the cruise ship, right? And she's 28, something like that. And at the time, there's no reason that I would have heard her or that she would have heard of me because, again, she's from New Zealand. But during that cruise, she wasn't working because it was a music cruise. So they were off, just kind of chilling. She found out I was on the cruise. And so after rehearsal one day, she and her band come up to me and she says, Mr. Whalum. And then she just broke out crying, right? And I just went and just embraced her, and she put her head on my shoulder. She just cried it out. And I'm like, what is this about? But again, it was one of those moments where I said, you know what? It's easy for me to, I'm always trying to get better at what I do, right? So I'm constantly practicing. But it's easy to discount, Aaron, right? The impact that we have on others because of God's grace. And she, in that moment, made me sit up and say, hey, man, there are people all over the world who love and appreciate you for what you've done. So you need to accept that. And now what positive can I do with that? And that's when I called Jim. So to your point, all of those artists that are in this, I'm telling you, the record is freaking off the chain. I mean, it's really amazing. But not a single one of those artists was like, okay, here would be a good idea to do this one, collaborate with this artist because this artist is huge or whatever. No, they were all just people I had met, people I had heard. Like you saw Grace, the song Peace, right? Her name is Grace and the song is Peace, my God. That should have told me something. But yeah, again, same thing. It's like, man, these are just people. I heard her. I was in Jakarta performing at the Java Jazz Festival. We're in our place where they feed us, this particular green room. And right outside the green room is this club, right? Because it's in this whole big space and it's all, sort of separated out. In this little club, this lady's singing her heart out. But it wasn't the kind of singing like, like Beyonce. It wasn't like, oh, wow, listen to what she just sang. It wasn't that. She was singing her own music. And she sang with conviction. She was 25 or something. I'm like, wow, listen to this girl. And I could not concentrate. I'm trying to eat. I finally just put my plate down, man, and just went over and stood there and listened to her. And when she was done, I'm saying, ma'am, I'm a saxophonist from the States. My name is Kirk Whalum. She's, you're Kirk Whalum? Like that again. So I'm like, hey, come in. And so sure enough, man, I said, man, will you consider, let's do something together, And so that story went on and on. So Diane, thank you for asking that. And I'm so excited for this record to come out. I mean, we brought, yes.
Thank you.
We brought some hashtag love covers. This, it's going to be a collector's item because it's the record he put out just before, before Humanité. Because Humanité is not finished yet and pressed, but I brought some and I'm happy to sign those after we get done yapping. And we're almost through yapping, I promise. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you very much, and welcome back to my neighborhood.
Sheen.
Talk about meeting that young woman that you said. Talk about Providence. There's Providence for you.
Man. I'm telling you, it was Providence for me to hear that sermon today.
Gentlemen, good evening. Grace and peace. Just wanted to thank you guys for your collaboration. Jim, you and I were conversing before, and you by no means abide the same spirit of the man that's in the White House. And it's just gentlemen like you with your worldview and your community view that are going to bring this country through the changes and challenges that we're going through and the world. Yes. Just wanted to thank you.
Thank you.
That's something we'll do together.
And by the way, those are some fly glasses you got on. Man.
Oh, Kirk said when I come to Memphis, he's going to hook me up with some real glasses.
I like those.
No. Come on.
Anyway.
How you doing, Kirk?
My brother. Good to see you, man.
Again.
All right, last time I saw you was at the NAMM show out in
Yes,
LA.
the NAMM show.
The Music Merchant show.
I had a great time walking with you that day. Trying to phrase this the right way. Don't like to bring up things of hearsay, but I actually did hear that you were facing some challenges in the industry in terms of your public profession of Christ with promoters and possibly even not getting work because you were not afraid to profess your faith. Would you mind talking about that?
Absolutely.
How you've handled that?
Sure, absolutely. A question from a great musician. So, it is just a fact that in the public space, right, in the marketplace, there is a certain responsibility, the word you used earlier, on behalf of the person holding the microphone, right? So someone paid to sit in a chair and you have a microphone. So it's a responsibility to respect that setup. and to say that what did the people come to hear? They came to hear music. So I got to make sure they get some good music. But now, what they also came to experience is, who are you? Okay, so if you can just maybe share a little bit of who you really are, okay, not something that you contrive for the audience, but who are you? Okay, then I think that's a bonus. But it has to be done in such a way where I am respectful of everybody else's faith tradition in the room. I was on a show the other day with a guy who was also a Christian like myself. And he in this, again, this is out in the marketplace, he said, okay, everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. Okay, now lift your hands up. Raise your hands. We're going to worship God today. And I was like, well, maybe what we should do, instead of that, like that's what we do when we're in our space and we're free to do that, to have a public, outward, overt, demonstration of my love and passion for God, and I lift my hands and I worship God. And I might even do that from the stage, but I'm not going to impose that on you. Okay? If you want to lift your hand, that's fine. But I'm not going to stand here and say, stand up and lift your hands up, right? So the point is that the expression of my faith is the expression of who I am. And I would say whose I am. So I think even people who are not people of faith, person who's atheist, person maybe Muslim, whatever, people can respect that. And they can appreciate, say, wait a minute, this brother is authentically whoever that is. I mean, he's kind of wacky, but I like him because, it's just who you are, right? So thank you for asking that. And I think a lot about it, I pray a lot about it. And yes, there have been times when categorically I have been blackballed in certain circles of promoters because I stand there flat-footed and say, man, I love Jesus. And you would think that I had got up there with a gun and done that, but apparently now you can do that, and some folk are okay with that, but they don't want you to say who you love, so that's the way things go. Love you, brother.
Thank you. And quick question for Jim. Are you open to working with artists who may not be as famous?
All right. I'll answer that for him. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question.
Good evening. All throughout your film, I noticed how music had such a healing power. And especially a scene that struck me was the school children that you brought the instruments to. And we know how a lot of music programs here in the States have been cut. But my question is, how can we get music back in the schools and back into that space where we can begin that healing for children, and others, how can we do that? Because it needs to.
Well, Elizabeth Njore, she was a pharmacist. She had some privilege because her dad was a pharmacist, and so they had some means. And she wanted to be a musician, and her dad, just kind of said, that's not going to be where you're going to be able to make a living or anything from. And in Africa, she just kind of said, well, Dad, I'll reserve if that's what I need to do, but she never forgot the dream. And so really it was just in her heart to go into that school. And she talked to the leaders of the school, and they saw it. And that was one of the most beautiful things to me, and I'm glad you asked about it, because when they say, that their culture now, that music is a part of their culture, and it's like crying, because it's how they can bring out and face some of the anxieties. It's actually an emotional healing kind of thing. And so when you see that, you know the power of it. I don't know, on a political and budget and any other kind of level, but I do know that this relates to what I said before. I'm a filmmaker. I want to tell stories that make a difference in a community. I'll make films with anybody that has a great story. And I think it takes artists to come down from the celebrityville and just kind of be people again and give what they can to a community. Because there are musicians that can teach kids. And if we just embrace that idea, if we champion that idea, if we tell those stories, if we nurture that, that's what happened in that community. And we can say that this policy or this thing should happen, but man, I hope that the artists just sort of grab a mitt and get in the game.
That's good, man. And I guess, the last comment today, I'll agree with Jim, and I'll say that there has to be, right now we're discussing, what's been called the Green New Deal. And I think one of the things we need to discuss is the arts New Deal. Like some kind of way we have to be just that forceful and that convicted about the impact of art and music on our culture. That's one of the problems right now, because music stimulates a different way of thinking. And when you take that away, then people are more strident. And man, we see the effects of it. You can almost go back to the moment when it happened. And when I started, man, David, I was given a saxophone. Again, my folks were doing pretty well, but not well enough to buy a saxophone. And that describes most families. But when I was in the seventh grade, they gave me one to play, and and everybody got instruments. If you didn't, you were in the choir. You got access to the experience of playing music or being involved in music. And to me, man, when they took that away, and they're so smart, right? They say, "Oh no, we don't need that," and you look at the way, the rap industry developed. I mean, I love rap music, I love hip hop, but it was a reaction at its beginning to the types of circumstances, the depravity of the stuff that we're talking about, being able to take music classes and things, to be able to learn how to play an instrument. They didn't have it. But they still had the drive to say something. They still had the drive to make these beats. And so that's how the music developed. It was a reaction. So I'm just hoping that we don't have to do that in the next generation, but let's get this ship back on the right road. Yeah. Teach some music.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir, for asking that question. That's really a big part of what we're hoping to do here at the Sheen Center as well, is to, we're really trying to figure out how we as an arts center can bring those arts to particularly underserved school communities. So if anybody has any ideas or any schools, please speak to me afterwards, because we're certainly open to hearing anything. I just want to say, we live in such divided times, we live in such polarized times, that I think jazz is a really useful metaphor in many ways. It allows us to each bring our own individual voices. That individuality is important. Sometimes I think we focus too much on autonomy, but individuality is important. But we can learn how to play and make beautiful music together, each respecting each other. All I want to say is thank you both. Thank you for at least one night, in a very small way, building a beloved community here. And for allowing us to peek over our hedges and to play in your yards for a while. But before I let you go, being that we are a faith-based arts center, being that you are an ordained minister, being that when you came out it was starting to sound a little bit like church here for a while, could we perhaps maybe end on a prayerful note, whether that's musical or otherwise? Maybe you remember how to play Amazing Grace or whatever.
So about 45 seconds ago when you were talking, in my head I said, because he had said earlier, would you feel comfortable ending in a prayer, with a prayer? And I said, absolutely. But about a minute ago, I changed my mind. I said, I'm going to play Amazing Grace. And so Providence.
Well, Providence, absolutely.
So this is our ending prayer.
Quick shout out to Loretta Shields, who is my stylist. She taught me a lot about putting stuff together. So it's like this.